This is the farmhouse where I grew up, where my father grew up, where my grandfather grew up, where my great-grandfather grew up. The main house was built in 1860. We got electricity in 1943 with the Rural Electrification Act. And now what I am doing is I'm removing the majority of the 1960 updates and reverting the era back to somewhere between 1920 and 1950. I'm going to show you each room in the order that I did them years ago. While I am no more of a carpenter or a designer than any member of my family has ever been, I'm doing it to suit me and my tastes. With the mudroom and the lab being on the opposite side of the house from my main heating source, I decided to put a portable heater, a smaller version of my big one, in the mudroom. I chose a Laser 30 kerosene heater. It's vented to the outside. I picked up a used one for half price, and you can see it sitting there on the floor. And the first thing to do is install the chimney. So that's what the hole is in the wall. And then you insert the chimney from the inside out, and you're looking at the inside of it. And then on the outside, you screw on the other end. And as you can see, it ended up being directly below the handrail, just beside the door. Not the ideal place to put it, but it was a cold winter that we finished the mudroom. And it was kind of a field expedient thing, and there's nothing more permanent in the world than a temporary fix. Here you can see a close-up of it. The center with the bird guard is the exhaust, and around it is the intake. So then it's a simple matter to slide the heater into position, level it with the adjusting legs, and connect up the exhaust. As you can see here, we had to get quite creative with the kerosene line because I tried to bend it and have that S. It would kink. So I used a bunch of connectors, and finally I could get the flare nut to align with the valve on the back of the heater, as you see. And here you can see that it's tucked in under the coat rack, and it is in operation. And it heats the room quite nicely. It's a 15,000 BTU, so it heats that mudroom and my lab and part of the kitchen. But because this was a used model and an early one at that, it did not have the modern electronics for controlling the temperature setback. So what I ended up doing was I put this chunk of wood on the wall with pocket screws, and then I installed a X10 Powerhouse thermostat setback controller. And above it is the thermistor that senses the temperature in the room that goes to the heater. Now what that setback controller does is when it's turned on, it sends a little bit of heat through resistors upwards to the thermistor. And the thermistor thinks the room is too warm, so it cools it down. And that's the way I control it. When I go to work, it automatically is turned on, which then the unit realizes the room's too warm and it cools down. Before I come home, my X10 home automation turns it off, and as the heat is stopped being fed to the thermistor, it will then realize the room is too cold and it will warm up the room. And after a couple trial and errors, mostly errors, I realized that the unit had to set off the wall and into the air of the room so that it would read the air temperature correctly, because otherwise it's reading the wall, and that is only about a foot or less from the outside of the house, and the cold is transferred through the solid wood, and it would not read correctly. And that is how we put heat in the mudroom and the lab.